The job at the Amazon Fulfillment Center was never something I dreamed of doing. It was just a paycheck, a way to keep the lights on, and the rent paid while I figured out my next move. And the place itself was a monument to sheer scale. A colossal gray box set under an even grayer sky, surrounded by an ocean of asphalt that shimmered with heat haze in the summer and turned into a frozen, potholed wasteland in the winter. And inside, the air hummed with a constant, low-level vibration, a mixture of 1,000 conveyor belts, distant forklifts, and the pervasive white noise of 1,000 people not talking to each other, all of us moving with a purpose that felt borrowed, not earned. My specific role was as a picker, which meant I walked miles every shift, guided by a handheld scanner that told me which bin to go to, what item to grab, and into which yellow plastic tub to place it. The scanner screened a tiny digital dictator that defined my every movement for 10 hours a day. And the aisles were like canyons, walls of metal shelving that stretched up so high you needed a special ladder to reach the top levels, with a flat, sterile lighting that bleached all the color from your face and made every shadow seem sharp and deliberate, like it had been cut out with a knife. The strangeness didn't start on day one. Of course, the first week was all standard corporate onboarding. Videos about safe lifting techniques, warehouse layout, the mind-numbing importance of proper hydration. It was during the second week that my trainer, a quiet, perpetually tired-looking man named Carl, sat me down in a break room that smelled permanently of burnt popcorn and industrial cleaner. And he went over the usual stuff. Break times, performance metrics, which bathrooms were the least disgusting. And then his tone shifted, grew heavier, like he was pushing the words out against their will. And he pulled a single laminated card from his vest pocket. It was an off-white color, the edges worn soft from handling, and he slid it across the table to me. The heading simply read, "For your safety," and the rules listed were unlike any safety protocol I'd ever seen. Rule 1 was if you hear a child humming the tune to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star from within the shelves, do not go looking for the source. Instead, you were to turn down aisle G14 and wait exactly 2 minutes before returning to your route, and your scanner would resync. Rule 2 stated that the motion-activated lights in the high storage sectors, aisles A through D, sometimes stay off, and if you enter an aisle and the lights do not come on within a count of 3, you back out slowly, without using your headlamp, without calling out, and wait 10 minutes before trying again. Rule 3 was a real mind-bender. It said you would occasionally see an employee wearing a navy blue vest, not the standard orange, and that these people do not work here, and you were not to make eye contact or ask them for directions. And if one approaches you, you find a manager immediately, with a specific note that a real manager will be wearing an orange vest with a green stripe on the left shoulder, no exceptions. Rule 4 was about the break room vending machine, the one marked snack time. It said it is never fully stocked, and if you see it completely full, with every coil holding a pristine bag of chips or a candy bar, you do not make a purchase, you just walk away. Rule 5 was about the scanner itself. It said your device will never display a string of 9 identical numbers, and if you see something like 94955 or 1151 as a bin location, you do not proceed. You mark the task as item damaged and move on, and you do not question it. Rule 6 was short and absolute. It stated the warehouse has no basement, and if you find a door that shouldn't be there, especially one with a set of stairs leading down, you report its location to a green-striped manager, and then avoid that sector for the rest of your shift. And you do not open the door, you do not go down the stairs. The final rule, Rule 7, was about time. It said at exactly 3:33 a.m., all ambient noise will cease for a period of 13 seconds, and that this is normal, and you are to continue working, to not stop moving, and to not try to talk about it with your coworkers afterward because they will not acknowledge it. Carl watched me read it, his expression completely unreadable, and he said, "You think it's a joke, a hazing thing. I thought that too. Just follow the rules. Your life will be a lot easier. and I did think it was a joke. It had to be. This was a multi-billion-dollar company, not some summer camp ghost story. I figured it was some bizarre corporate team-building nonsense, or a way to weed out the people who didn't have the mental fortitude for the soul-crushing monotony of the job. So I took the card, nodded seriously, and secretly thought Carl was a little bit crazy. For the first month, nothing happened. The routine was grinding but predictable. Scan, walk, grab, pack, repeat. The rules faded into the back of my mind, becoming just another odd footnote to a boring job. Until the first incident happened on a Tuesday around 2 in the morning. The night shift has its own rhythm. A strange, sleep-deprived energy where the world outside the warehouse walls ceases to exist, and I was in Sector C, the high storage area, a maze of towering shelves that blocked any view of the rest of the facility, where the motion-activated lights were notoriously spotty, creating pools of harsh light and deep, impenetrable shadow. And I turned into aisle C47. The lights above me were on, but about 50 feet down, the next bank was dark, which wasn't unusual. I started walking, my footsteps echoing dully on the concrete floor, and I was about halfway to the dark section when I realized the next set of lights hadn't flicked on. The sensor should have seen me by now. I kept walking, assuming a delay, and I reached the border between light and dark. The darkness in front of me was absolute, a wall of black that seemed to swallow the sound of the warehouse hum. And I remembered the rule, count of 3. So I did. 1, and the hair on my arms stood up because the darkness felt wrong. It wasn't just an absence of light. It felt thick, substantive, like a curtain too, and a sound came from the blackness ahead. A soft, shuffling drag, like something heavy being pulled slowly across the floor, followed by a wet, rhythmic clicking. 3, the lights did not come on. The rule was clear: back out slowly, do not use your headlamp. So I took a step back, and the shuffling drag stopped, but the clicking intensified, speeding up, as if in anticipation. I took another step back, then another, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't turn around until I was back in the full light of the previous bank of fixtures. I didn't run, but it was a near thing. I waited the full 10 minutes, leaning against a shelf, trying to calm my breathing. And when I tried the aisle again, the lights came on immediately, illuminating a perfectly normal, empty corridor, and I told myself it was a faulty sensor, a coincidence. But I had never heard a sound like that wet clicking in this warehouse before, and I never wanted to hear it again. A week later, I saw the blue vest. It was in the vast open area where sorted packages travel on miles of conveyor belts. A chaotic symphony of whirring motors and scanning lasers, and I was taking a shortcut to my next pick zone when I saw him. A man, standing perfectly still amidst the flowing river of boxes. He was tall and gaunt, and his vest was a deep, unmistakable navy blue, and he was just staring at the packages going by, his head tilted at an angle that didn't look comfortable. And my blood went cold remembering Rule 3, do not make eye contact, do not ask for directions, so I quickly looked down at my scanner, pretending to be engrossed in its screen, and I altered my course to give him a wide berth. And as I passed, about 30 feet away, I risked a glance, and he wasn't looking at the packages anymore. His head had swiveled, and he was staring directly at me. His face was pale and waxy, and his eyes were too dark, like holes punched in paper, and I immediately looked away, my pace quickening. I didn't run, but I wanted to, and I scanned the area frantically for a manager, for that green stripe, and I found one by a water cooler, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda, and without saying a word, I just pointed, and she followed my gaze. Her face tightened. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded once, pulled out her radio, and spoke into it quietly. She didn't thank me or explain. She just said, "Get back to your station." And when I looked back, the man in the blue vest was gone. The 3:33 a.m. silence was the next thing I experienced, and it was the most profound silence I have ever encountered. One moment, the warehouse was its usual self, a cacophony of beeping, rumbling, and distant voices, and the next, it was gone, not just quiet, but void, The absence of sound was so complete it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. And I froze, a box half lifted in my hands. And I remembered the rule, continue working, do not stop moving. So with a huge effort of will, I forced myself to place the box in the tub. The action made no noise. I took a step forward. My boot should have scuffed the floor, but it didn't. The 13 seconds felt like an eternity. A pocket of dead air trapped outside of time. And then, as suddenly as it had left, the sound crashed back in. The beeping, the rumbling, the distant yell of a forklift driver, it was deafening by contrast. And I looked around, and no one else had reacted. A woman across the aisle continued scanning items, her movements a study in robotic efficiency, her face a placid mask under the stereo lights. A man on a ladder kept stocking shelves, his arms moving with a steady, rhythmic certainty. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't just dropped away into a vacuum for 13 heartbeats. And I didn't dare ask about it. The warning in the rule was clear. They would not acknowledge it. And the last thing I wanted was to be marked as the guy who couldn't handle the night shift. But inside, something had fundamentally shifted. The last of my skepticism had been vaporized in that absolute silence. I was a believer now. The rules were not a joke. They were not a test. They were a survival guide. A series of desperate measures designed to keep something at bay, to maintain a fragile veil of normalcy over a place that was anything but normal. The final straw, the thing that made me decide I had to quit, that made me sure I would never set foot in that concrete labyrinth again, happened last week. It was one of those nights where the fatigue was a physical weight, making my limbs feel heavy and my thoughts slow and syrupy. The constant hum of the warehouse seemed to seep into my bones, and I was moving through the aisles on autopilot, my scanner dictating my every turn, my mind 1,000 miles away, when the device in my hand pinged with a new item, a sharper, more insistent tone than usual, and I looked down at the screen, my eyes struggling to focus on the glowing green text, and the bin location was not a normal series of letters and numbers. It was a string of numbers, a solid block of identical digits, 1151, and a cold knot tightened in my stomach, a visceral reaction that cut through the fog of exhaustion like a shard of ice. Rule 5 flashed in my mind, clear and unambiguous. Do not proceed. Mark as item damaged. My thumb hovered over the button. My heart starting to thump a little harder against my ribs, the rational part of my brain, the part that was still clinging to the world I knew, told me to just press it, to walk away, to pretend I never saw it. But a terrible, consuming curiosity seized me, a need to know that was stronger than the fear. What would happen if I broke a rule just once? What was the actual consequence? Was it all just an elaborate psychological test to see who would follow orders without question? Or was it something else? Something real? I had to know. I had to see it for myself. So I ignored the warning. My fingers, feeling clumsy and foreign, typed the string into the navigation aid, and the screen blinked, accepting the command, and a new path lit up on the little map. It pointed me away from the main thoroughfares, deep into Sector F, the oldest part of the warehouse, a place we rarely had to go, a place with narrower aisles that felt more like tunnels, with flickering, older lights that cast jumpy, nervous shadows that danced across the shelving. The air here smelled different. It was stale and metallic, like old coins and dust, with an underlying hint of ozone, as if from old, overworked electrical systems. The usual warehouse hum was muted here, replaced by a deeper, almost subaudible thrum that I felt in my teeth more than heard. The navigation led me on a twisting route, past aisles crammed with forgotten stock, boxes warped with age and covered in a fine gray fur of dust. Finally, it indicated I had reached my destination, a dead-end aisle, one that was supposed to be used for long-term storage of obsolete returns, a place where products went to be forgotten. The light at the end of the aisle was out, leaving the far wall in deep shadow, and at the very end was a single large bin, set low to the ground. It was made of a darker, older metal than the others, and it was labeled with a faded, handwritten tag. The numbers on it were barely legible but unmistakable. 1151. My heart was pounding now, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. This was it. I was going to see the monster behind the curtain. I was going to pull back the facade and see what they were so desperate to keep us from seeing. I knelt down, the cold of the concrete seeping through the knee of my jeans. I reached into the dark mouth of the bin, and my fingers brushed against cold, smooth plastic. The object was lighter than I expected. I pulled it out into the flickering light. It was a child's toy, a music box, shaped like a little carousel with painted horses, frozen mid-gallop, their colors faded and worn. It was coated in a fine layer of dust that felt strangely greasy to the touch. It looked old, a relic from another time, but not broken. There were no cracks, no visible damage, but holding it felt wrong, deeply and profoundly wrong. It felt like holding a wasp's nest, a sense of active, buzzing malevolence emanating from it, a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature seeped into my palm. I wanted to put it down, to mark it as damaged and walk away, to run back to the bright, noisy safety of the main floor, but I felt compelled to see it through. A morbid fascination that glued my feet to the floor. There was a small crank on the bottom, a tiny brass handle, and against every screaming instinct I had, against the voice in my head that was shouting at me to stop, I turned the crank. It moved stiffly, with a gritty, grinding resistance, and it didn't play a song. No tinny melody filled the air. Instead, a tiny, thin voice, the kind from an old phonograph record, scratchy and layered with static, whispered from the small speaker grill. It didn't sound like a recording. It sounded like it was speaking directly to me. It said, "Thank you for finding me. I get so lonely down here," and I recoiled. Dropping the box, it hit the concrete with a plastic crack, but the voice didn't stop. It grew louder, no longer confined to the tiny speaker, but seemed to come from the shelves around me, from the shadows themselves that were now gathering and thickening at the end of the aisle. The voice was everywhere and nowhere. It said, "It's so much quieter down here. So much cooler. Won't you come see? The stairs are just behind you." And a paralysis of pure dread locked my joints. I forced myself to move, to spin around, and there, in the solid, unbroken wall of the aisle, was a door. It was old, made of heavy, dark wood, scarred and stained, with a tarnished brass knob, utterly out of place in the industrial setting, and it was slightly ajar, and from the crack, I could see the top of a rough-hewn stone staircase leading down into a profound, absolute darkness, a darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the aisle, and a damp, earthy smell, like soil and rot and something older, something metallic and coppery, wafted from the opening, and Rule 6 screamed in my head, "The warehouse has no basement. This cannot be here. This should not be here." And I didn't run at first. I was frozen, my eyes fixed on that impossible door, and the tinny voice was still whispering. But it was changing, pleading now, becoming more desperate, more angry. The words began to slur and distort, no longer forming coherent sentences, but just a stream of need and rage, and the door began to open wider, not swung open, but pushed by something unseen from the other side, moving slowly and deliberately. And I saw a long, pale hand curl around the edge of the door. The fingers were too long, too thin, the joints bending in wrong places. The skin was waxy and translucent, like a grub, and I could see the dark outlines of bones and tendons beneath. The nails were cracked and dirty, and the hand gripped the doorframe with a terrible, deliberate strength. And that was enough. The spell broke. Pure, animal terror flooded my system. I turned and I ran. I didn't care about protocol. I didn't care about my job. I slammed into the shelving as I fled the dead-end aisle, sending boxes tumbling. I ran past startled coworkers who looked up from their scanners with blank, confused expressions. I ran past a manager who shouted after me, his words lost in the roar of blood in my ears. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I burst through the doors into the parking lot, the cold night air hitting me like a physical blow. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I threw myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and peeled out of the parking lot, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps, and I never went back. I called the next day from the safety of my own home, my voice still unsteady, and quit over the phone. The HR person sounded bored, utterly disinterested, as if they got these calls all the time. They didn't ask for a reason. They didn't try to convince me to stay. They just said my final check would be mailed, and I still have trouble sleeping. The hum of my refrigerator sometimes mimics the warehouse drone, and I'll jolt awake, convinced I'm back there. I see the stark, white lights of big box stores, and my breath catches in my throat. A cold sweat breaking out on my back. I know it sounds insane. I know what I saw, what I heard. I broke a rule, and I saw the truth they're trying to contain in that place. They're not just shipping packages. They're building a prison around something, or for something, and the inmates are starting to find ways out. I don't know what's down those stairs, and I never ever want to know. I just know I can never go back, and I would advise anyone who hears a child humming in those aisles to turn around and walk the other way, and to never,